Hello and welcome to the Extremis Publishing podcast. I'm Tom Christie. Scottish history is the subject for today's episode, and I'm delighted to be joined by two special guests, Dr. David Mitchell, who is Director of Cultural Assets at Historic Environment Scotland, the Head of the Board of Trustees at the venerable Stirling Smith Art Gallery and Museum, and also one of the trustees at Stirling District Tourism. And I'm also joined by Tracey MacIntosh, who spent many years as an advisor and in many different roles involved in the cultural heritage industry in Stirling, and who now runs her own private consultancy advising on cultural heritage and historical issues. Welcome both.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about a brand new book, Stirling Legends, which is being published in collaboration with Stirling District Tourism, and which covers many different topics and historical figures in and around the Stirling area. So how did the project come about?
It's the year of Scotland Stories for Visit Scotland, and as Stirling District Tourism run Legends Coffee Shop and Gift House, the two of them came together quite nicely in my head as a kind of ideal time to put together an anthology of legends around Stirling. And what we were really looking for were legends that are maybe slightly less well known, maybe a bit more difficult to find out about. So hopefully that's what we've come up with our anthology.
So Stirling is a remarkably historic town, as many people know, but Tracey's right in that what we tried to do is look at some of the stories beneath those of castles, kings and queens, to some of the more hidden histories.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, David, because I know in discussion with Murray Cook, my friend, the borough archaeologist, and also one of the writers who has contributed to the book, he always said the thing that makes Stirling so special is the fact that all of that history is still here. It's still here for people to come and visit and to enjoy. How do you feel this book helps to bring that alive for visitors?
Well, we've purposely selected some stories that are not very well known, and probably not even very well known to people who've lived in Stirling all their lives. Some that are only alive to academics perhaps, but we've tried to tell them in an engaging way and not an overly academic way. So even in the process of the few that I've written, speaking to local people, absolutely had no idea of some of the things that had gone on locally.
And I think that's one of the things that makes the book special, isn't it? Because all of these things are available for people to come and see if they're here on holiday or just visiting the area. I myself was delighted to find out so many things that were right here on our doorstep that, as you rightly say, some people might not even have been aware were there, and hopefully this book will help them to seek it out for themselves. So, Tracey, what were the challenges involved in bringing together so many different authors to talk about so many subjects?
Well, yeah, there was a bit of a challenge in pulling together a number of different people, but I think the biggest challenge was whittling down which legends we were going to write about. I think we had we chatted about it over breakfast one day, David, I think 4 of us, and we had a list of legends, and it was almost between the 4 of us thinking, what are the most compelling, the least well known, the most surprising perhaps, that might really grip people and think, wow, I didn't know that, wow, I have to go and see that now. And I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges, was really whittling down to say, okay, what are we actually going to go for? And then to think, okay, who can we approach to write that one? Yeah, so that was quite interesting.
There's a tradition in Stirling of publishing back to the 19th century, and it's interesting actually, there were quite a few books published in a similar sort of vein. None of the stories we're talking about, but it's quite nice to be continuing that tradition.
Yes, I can only marvel at the Drummond Track Depot, who were so successful that an extra track had to be put in at the railway station to accommodate all their books. So if there are any distributors out there listening, for extremispublishing.com is what you want to find. One of the things I was really impressed by actually was just how well the book chimes in with a lot of the current cultural developments that are going on in Stirling. I think particularly of the very well publicised restoration of Cowan's Hospital, and how that ties in with the John Cowan story. It seems very timely, doesn't it, that he's another character that's going to be reintroduced for people who are coming to the area.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cowan's Hospital is almost one of those big attractions that's tucked away in the top of Stirling as well. You've got this real concentration of amazing heritage right in the top of Stirling, and it continues all the way down through Broad Street, through the city as well. And I think it's great to really pull out some of those little gems that people in Stirling might know a bit about, not an awful lot, but certainly visitors to Stirling will discover for the first time, hopefully. Our book will help pull in visitors to allow them to explore some of those gems.
And just as interesting, of course, is whereas Cowan was such a towering character in his day, we have a certain alchemist in Stirling Castle, and it's interesting to see him being brought back to life as well.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah. And that was probably the last story that we managed to get together for the book, because we did think about it. Because to my mind, having worked in Stirling Castle for a long time, to me that was a story that everyone knows. You know, everyone in Stirling knows. And it was pointed out to me, and it's, no, that's just because you know Stirling Castle pretty well. Not everyone knows that story. Not everyone in Stirling knows that story. I thought, yeah, that's actually true. Yeah, I guess. And it's one of the stories, I know all of the guides in Stirling Castle really enjoy that story. All the visitors seem to really enjoy it. It really seems to capture people's imagination. So it's a lovely one. Yeah.
And of course, not all of the figures that are mentioned are from centuries ago. I mean, I noticed the Barnwell brothers and their contribution to Stirling's story has been mentioned as well. So that's a valuable aspect of Stirling's past to bring up too.
It's interesting. Stirling is not seen as being a particularly industrial town compared to, towards Falkirk, etc. But actually, it did have some key industries. It was a leading manufacturer of carriages and agricultural equipment. It's an agricultural town for the most part. But yeah, flight is not something you would associate with Stirling, and actually it was really significant and really important.
And staying with that topic of transport, of course, David, you talk about Stirling's maritime heritage as well.
Yes, it's interesting for even those who live here. The River Forth is rather sleepy as a river, but actually it has been for thousands of years a primary source of transport, and really only in the past 150 or so years has that died away. So we see huge amount of traffic up and down the river, from the earliest dugout canoes right up to paddle steamers, and one of the earliest passenger services in Europe by steamship, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, of course, it would be remiss of me not to ask both of you if you have a favourite chapter from the book or figure that has come back to life as a result of the project.
I think I have. It's not a person; it's a thing. So the Black Boy Fountain, which I have looked at since I was a small boy, has been a bit of a mystery, and I've been very interested in architectural ironwork for 30 years now, and I could not work it out. And in the process of researching for this book, I actually worked out what its origins are, and it's quite an unusual piece. And I'll just say it has an association with Queen Victoria that I didn't expect, but you need to buy the book to find out the rest of the story.
Yeah. And for me, I think Christiane McLagan is one of the figures written about, and I'd heard of her, and I'd heard some stories about her, but I think Moray Cross brings her to life beautifully, and it's a really honest rendition. It doesn't put it up on a pedestal. It's a great story, and I just have this vision of her around the Highlands with her sheets doing her rubbings of the various stones and things as well. So it's I think that would have to be my favourite. Yeah.
And I imagine another one of those situations, isn't it, where past and present collide, because her papers were presented by Stirling Smith.
No, she did. Yeah.
And as someone who worked at the Smith many years ago, it's nice to know that that aspect has continued. These informative talks are still given to this day.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We have one of her models of a broch in the collections at the Smith, which is great. And actually, a few years back, we found one of her rubbings, which got the archaeologists I work with overexcited. So that has been scanned and is available. But she was a remarkable woman in lots of different ways. And when you read her story now, it just seems remarkable that she was treated the way she was for so long.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and it says a great deal actually about Stirling's archaeological and indeed cultural heritage, that these characters are so compelling that people want to come back to them, don't they, generation after generation.
Yeah, and I think as Tracey mentioned earlier, there was almost an embarrassment of riches in terms of stories. So there are dozens of stories yet to be told, which I think is great.
Mm. Yes, and I think that's what I really admire about this book, and certainly the collection of different accounts that have been brought together. There have been many different TV programmes that talk about the well-known areas of Stirling and the places that are easily accessible. What I like about this book is it brings to life particular aspects that people, as you mentioned, may not necessarily be aware of, and brings them back to life again. It brings a much sharper focus onto these stories, and I think that's something that's really commendable, because it's something that I hope will bring people to the area, and for those of us who live in the area, it perhaps brings a new aspect to those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope both of those things, that will encourage local people to go out and explore or look at Stirling with fresh eyes, or different aspects of Stirling they weren't totally aware of, but also really encourage those visitors to Stirling to delve a little bit deeper into some of the lesser known bits and pieces that we have that are really remarkable. Yeah. And also, with all these other legends we have, who's to say there won't be a Stirling Legends Volume 2?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's great that Stirling District Tourism can help to promote these stories. We've had a long association with the National Wallace Monument and other sites within the Stirling area, so it's great if we can spread that tourism out a little bit. And we know from research that tourists coming to Scotland now are much better informed. The internet allows them to do their research, and they're quite keen to go off-piste and look at things, hidden histories perhaps. So that's great to enable that.
Mm. Yes, I think that's absolutely right, because I think of American friends that I have who are genuinely fascinated by just how far back this area goes, and ancient to the point, in fact, that people look at the Abbey Craig upon which the Wallace Monument now stands, and often don't realise at one point that was the furthest point into the River Forth, when it was still part of a much broader sea of water, and that the whales which would have lived there all those thousands of years ago, there are still bones in the Stirling Smith collections today which they can see. So I think that's a really remarkable thing, and if anybody is coming to Stirling, I would certainly recommend a visit to the Smith, because you'll be amazed at just the sheer length of time that is covered by the different exhibits that are on display there.
Certainly, I mean, so the reason Stirling exists and why it's significant is primarily down to the landscape and the location. So it really did function as a gateway between south and north, and as an access point to that. And the geology, the underlying geology of Stirling, has really shaped Scotland's history in some respects, and certainly the development of Stirling as a town on the Crag and Tail formation. Yeah, it's pretty unique. I can't think of anywhere else quite like it.
Mm. Yes, the anvil of Scottish history, as Murray Cook calls it, because it was right there at the very centre, and anybody who wanted to take Scotland had to go through Stirling. Anybody who wanted to cross the Forth, in fact, had to go through Stirling. So as you say, it's little wonder there's just such a wealth of history here, and for people to continue exploring even today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope this book will encourage people to do their own research, and certainly history is not the domain of academics alone, and we've got some really talented local historians here in Stirling that produce wonderful work.
Yeah, because that's the key thing, isn't it? As you say, that hopefully the book will spark an entirely new sense of imagination in people and will make them want to go out and find out more. So in that sense, it could be a very, very useful starting point.
It's as somebody who writes occasionally for things, I'm always, I used to fear putting something in print that somebody would contradict, but actually it's quite unusual now not to do something that doesn't then produce another nugget of information. So I'll be really disappointed if we don't get some new nuggets of information from this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you have any particular ambitions for the book in the long term? What would you like to see? Would you like to see people responding to the stories, coming to the area, finding out more about the different things that are mentioned, or all of the above?
I think it would be really nice to see people visiting things that are lesser known. One of the stories I wrote about St Ninian's Kirk is literally a few hundred feet from my house, and people really don't know the story and what it is, and it's actually remarkable in lots of different ways. And I think it would be great to see. It's a little bit down at heels at the minute, but that level of interest is starting to spark some interest locally about doing some restoration conservation work. So if we can support that in some respect, I think that would be really exciting.
Because that is a fascinating story, actually, and I know that one of the illustrations in the book is of the Jacobite era fan that depicts the explosion of St Ninian's Kirk, and the fact that the tower still stands is actually quite a remarkable thing. So I would certainly encourage people to read the book for that story alone, in fact, because it's a really fascinating tale.
Yes, it is, and I look at that building often, and something that was quite cool to me, through doing the research for the book, I've been talking to the minister of that church, and he took me up to the top of the tower, which is very cool, and not many people get to do that. So, and through that actually we've had a discussion, and we're going to see if we can look at a project to bring visitor access back to that site again, and it is incredibly important.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's just one of so many different sites in Stirling that have attracted people for centuries. I'm reminded in the past of an account of ancient Egypt, where the culture lasted so long there were actually ancient Egyptian archaeologists who were looking back at the culture that existed. And in a strange sort of way, Stirling's a little bit like that. That's the amazing thing, isn't it, that you can look back and see what the views were of people in the Stuart court of their past, and now we can look back on them. It really is a remarkable thing. And of course, let's not forget the pop culture aspect as well, the fact that authors like George R.R. Martin have been influenced by Stirling Castle and accounts of the Stuart Kings when writing Game of Thrones. So that history is still alive today.
It is. Yeah, I often have mixed feelings. It's wonderful that people are inspired to come and see magic of the real, as sometimes I've heard it described. But yes, these are things that draw people into Stirling, and we hope then they can discover the real history, because real history is usually more exciting than fiction.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the stories about Cambus Kenneth Abbey as well, we looked at that story, and there was a fabulous line, I think it was Murray Cook came up with, about Cambus Kenneth Abbey, that it's a crook in the forth is worth more than an earldom in the north. Yeah, how cool is that? Yeah. So it doesn't feature in the particular story there, but it's such an incredible monument as well. And again, the view of it from the foot of the National Wallace Monument is pretty fantastic, but it's one that isn't really visited much at all. And it's one of these places that I've come to discover it, and quite often we take a picnic and go and sit just beside the grounds there, but there's very rarely anyone visiting or even having a wander around the grounds, and it's really a fabulous site.
It is, absolutely. And not just because part of it is so well preserved, but the part of it that isn't, you can still see the grandeur of that building, the sheer scale of it. Even though so much of it now is in ruins, it's a remarkable place to visit. And the connection with Robert the Bruce there as well, is good too. So, thank you, David and Tracey, for giving your thoughts about Stirling Legends. It's been fascinating to talk to you both about really a book that I think has something to interest everyone. There are so many different writers involved and so many different topics discussed. I know that anyone who has an interest in Scottish history will want to pick this book up and discover it for themselves. And even better yet, if they want to come to Stirling and bring the book with them to discover the places that are there, I'm sure that that would be the best outcome for everyone. So thank you both very much for being involved today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, thanks Tom.
Stirling Legends is available to buy from all good independent retailers and online booksellers worldwide. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that you'll tune in again soon.
If you would like to find out more about advertising on the Extremist Publishing podcast, please visit their website at www.extremistpublishing.com for details.